So how do we draw attention to what's not happening well, what ought to be happening better, and find ways to partner with others about it?
I think we have to get out of our cars. We have to actually walk in those neighborhoods and walk in their shoes. And I've been thinking lately, I've been watching some old civil rights movies, and the freedom riders that actually went down and the freedom summers where they stayed with them, they learned from them, they ate with them, they shared with them and understood, this is what you're going through. I understand, I get it, and I want to change it from my end because it's very hard for you to change it, but I'm in control of the institution.
Right.
So I can put in and start to try to change it. And I think we drive through our neighborhoods, the poorer neighborhoods, with our windows up and our music on, and we don't see them. We drive through to get home. And if we stopped and patronized some businesses or stopped and said, hello, can I help you? I think that would make a big difference in going a long way to understanding these are the issues.
There is a need to help empower the people within that community. I think they do have voices. A lot of times their voices are not being heard. And one of the difficulties, I think, within the majority culture is to listen to people who are different. Because they've said these things over and over again. They haven't necessarily organized themselves in order to make their voices become a kind of crescendo of what their needs are. But I think it's important that we learn to listen to those voices and let them speak and let them direct some of the things that we do. I think that there are a lot of instances where we impose policies and programs on a neighborhood that doesn't necessarily want that, without listening to what the neighborhood is saying that their real needs are, and being able to get into the communities and listen to the people and stop and talk with them and have dialogue. And even to the point of letting them lead some of the efforts, lead what we're doing, have an accountability to the people of those communities. Then I think it becomes important then that what comes out of that, what comes out of our effort, really benefit the people,
Right.
As opposed to as something that is that makes us feel good. I think that's part of what we really need to do. But part of it is really kind of listening. I think I'll go back to this book much earlier, a long time ago, this book called Black Like Me. And it's a perfect example of what has to happen in order, what has happened. We have someone in blackface come along and have this experience, and we then say, oh, isn't it a shame? But the people of the community have been saying all along, this is a shame. And it is only that we only hear that voice when it comes from someone who is white. And therein lies the problem, because the message is always there.
I remember a pretty profound scene in Gandhi where this young white, I can't remember if he was a reporter, but he was with Gandhi in the beginning stages of the movement. And at one point, when the movement was growing and growing, Gandhi turned to this young white, I believe, reporter and said, you need to back away now. We need to have our voices heard. You need to, and he was so hurt, but then he finally understood that he did need to back away and allow the other voices to come out.
One of the most insidious things, I think about any kind of ism or ist, racist, sexist, whatever, is that the people who who are in the minority or who are not the automatic favorites can internalize what's going on and start behaving as if this is correct, this is right, this is the way it is, this is the way it should be. I am who they say I am. I'm also reading a book about feminism and sexism called Lean In, I think is the title of it. But the author is saying, you know, women have internalized a whole lot of stuff over the years. And any woman my age has certainly heard something along the lines of, yes, sweetie, it's nice that you're so bright, but don't let it show so much. You know, men don't like it if you seem to be smarter than they are, you know.
My mother told me that.
Your mother told you that, yes. See, it's a message we get. And you know, things about how, you know, women don't lead the way men do. So the way women lead is not as good as the way men lead. So we've, you know, you're smiling. And it's, you know, partly it's funny because we've managed to cope with things about it, and some women have managed to say, okay, it isn't true. All of those things I heard, I'm allowed to do some stuff, but we internalized those messages, and I'm sure that we know that members of the gay and you know, lesbian and transgendered and bisexual communities internalized all kinds of messages about themselves, which is one of the reasons we have such a high suicide rate among gay teens. And when there's an ethnic or a racial group that is in a minority position and has been told and treated in a way that sends a message, you are not as good, you are automatically not as qualified, not as important, what you say over and over and over and over again, I'll listen if somebody, my skin color says it, you know, and that begins to be internalized sometimes,
Well,
and that's wicked.
It's not easy being African American. It's a daily thing. We
Mm-hmm.
have to think things through. I have to think about where I go.
Mm-hmm.
Am I going to be welcomed when I get there? Am I going to be taken seriously when I speak? If I speak to you over the phone and then you meet me and you've not met me before, are you going to think, wow, she speaks properly for an African American?
Oh.
Or are you educated enough?
Mm-hmm.
And my mantra growing up was, you've got to be 10,000 times better
Mm-hmm.
than the white person that you're going up against. So that was always in the back of my head, that you have to be better than.
Mm-hmm. There's always something to prove.
Yeah.
And anyone who's felt that way, we don't use that as a way to deflect from the conversation. We mustn't do that. Anyone who's ever felt that way, if you and I have felt that way about being women, that gives us the ability to empathize. And we have to use that empathy and to say, all right, let's remember what this is like and what this is likely to have been like day in and day out for millions of people among us.
Like everyone who's been abused, we have to not fall into the trap of becoming the abuser when we get into some kind of position where we're the one in charge. And that's hard to accept about ourselves, too. It just seems like we ought to be able to pay back sometimes.
Well, but what we're hearing is that
empathy is what we need to
Sure.
concentrate on.
and part of not being abusive is shutting up and listening and hearing and taking seriously what we're hearing.
And not discounting, because I hear that a lot. People discount what we see and how we see it. because it's not their experience and they feel that, oh, it can't be that way. The officers don't pull people over and do these things, but it is our experience. I mean, we feel that, and a lot of people discount it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know good and well you got pulled over for being black and not for breaking the law.
Or when you see an officer in your rearview mirror, you grip 10 and 2 and pray to God that you're not doing anything to get pulled over.
Mm-hmm. The Supreme Court has actually granted the police license to discriminate. It's not advertised by police departments because law enforcement officials know that the public would not respond well to this fact in an era of color blindness, supposed color blindness. But civil rights lawyers, including those litigating racial profiling cases, have been complicit in the silence, fearing that any acknowledgement that race-based policing is authorized by law would legitimate in the public mind the very practice they are hoping to eradicate. The truth is this, however: the court has indicated that in policing, race can be used as a factor in discretionary decision-making. In the United States versus Brignoni-Ponce, the court concluded it was permissible under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment for the police to use race as a factor in making decisions about which motorists to stop and search. In that case, the court concluded that the police could take a person's Mexican appearance into account when developing reasonable suspicion that a vehicle may contain undocumented immigrants. The court said that the likelihood that any person of Mexican ancestry is an alien is high enough to make Mexican appearance a relevant factor. Some commenters have argued that Brignoni-Ponce may be limited to the immigration context. The court might not apply the same principle to drug law enforcement. However, it's not obvious that the racial bias would be for limiting overt race discrimination by police to immigration. The likelihood that a person of Mexican ancestry is an alien could not be significantly higher than the likelihood that any random black person is a drug criminal. It's wicked.
We are playing into the stereotypes that have already been engendered by our news media, by all the things we see, and therefore what we're seeing now is the response by police, by others, to this built-in kind of bias that is sustained by the institution. That simply supports that.
Yeah, and we're seeing. I mean, we've had in Ferguson, in Baltimore, in New York, in Florida, in Texas, in Detroit, in Indianapolis. We see it. These are not isolated incidents. They are revealing to us that this is something that permeates the systems in our country.
And we understand why the people who do it get off
It's
without any penalty.
And this daily stress takes a toll on African Americans.
Yes, it does.
When you have to live in fear, and in the back of your mind, you want to make sure you get home at night and not do anything that's going to attract attention to yourself. It's a stressful way to live.
Yeah.
Stressful way to live.
Having a black friend in New York City who said she can't stay and work late at the office. Not very often. She's got to be able to get home on the bus. She can't necessarily count on hailing down a taxi. The taxis won't stop. To have a friend who is a black clergywoman say that she had to confiscate the family television because she was punishing her son. He'd done something. All right, no more television for you. But she knew the only way to enforce it was to move the TV out of the house. So she took it and put it in the trunk of her car. driving along on a city street. She saw someone pulled over by a police car, and she panicked. She panicked. She's in her clergy shirt with a collar on, and she's panicked because if I were to be stopped for some reason, I have a television set in the back of my car and I can't necessarily prove that it's mine. What a horrible way to go through your day. What a terrible thing.
Because the majority culture, I think a good number of them would not think that. I mean, it wouldn't cross your mind to
I
think
wouldn't.
that I would get stopped because maybe I have a television in my trunk, but
Or be-
African Americans, we calculate and do the permutations of what's going to happen if they pull me over, and how nice do I have to be, and even if I am very nice, if they're having a bad day, that might
Mhm.
result in me having a really bad day, and it's
Yeah.
I experienced that when I worked in hospice, and our chaplain was African American, and he asked me to go with him on some home visits in a smaller Indiana town where he knew he would not be welcome. And I said, I'd be happy to go with you, you know. And we made the mistake of stopping in a local fast food place for lunch. And a black man and a younger white woman walking into this fast food place, people literally turned around in their seats to watch us walk in, and then we decided not to eat there. We ate in the car. But I felt that, and I felt what 1/1,000,000th of what he must go through all the time in his life. And another good friend of mine, this was in the early 80s, she's a black opera singer. She was auditioning for Beverly Hills. She asked me to go with her to New York to kind of be a calming influence. And how we were treated in various venues was incredibly revealing. And I asked her why we were being treated that way. And she said, "You're white, but I'm black. And that makes all the difference."